12 days ago, a train carrying toxic materials derailed near East Palestine, Ohio, causing a massive explosion and a toxic smoke cloud over the town. Ohio Governor DeWine insists the pollution doesn't pose a serious threat to the 5 million people affected, people that rely on the river for drinking water, but those who use private wells near the derailment should maybe drink bottled water for a while, but still no serious threat, he says. Yeah, sure, dude. I'd like to see him drink that water because something tells me he wouldn't. The people of East Palestine, who have been largely ignored, would beg to differ that this situation is contained, safe, and good to go. One of the chemicals on the train was vinyl chloride, which is highly flammable and carcinogenic, especially through inhalation. When burned, it decomposes into other toxic compounds, including hydrogen chloride. But again, don't worry, y'all. I'm sure the pets and other animals dropping dead are due to climate change or racism. Or maybe the people are just making it up, like the folks dropping dead from cardiac arrest after the experimental COVID vaccine. Who can we even trust anymore, honestly? The people in East Palestine are pissed, and they ought to be.
They don't deserve to be nuked with toxic chemicals. This is crazy. There should be so much outrage everywhere about this. It's absurd, and it stinks out here. Like, man, people just don't deserve to get nuked with toxic chemicals just because railroad companies make an error by not checking their trains to make sure they're safe. They go off, they derail, and then, oh, the only way we can get business back for our $55 billion business is for us to blow it up and just ruin a whole city of like 3,000 people. If there's something we should do like a give, send, go and get every house here of 2,000 houses, whatever it is, or for the whole city, like reverse osmosis water so that the next generation of people don't grow legs out of their head.
Amen. This is an environmental disaster of epic proportions, but yet I have yet to see teen climate snob Greta Thunberg or Al Gore or John Kerry on the scene. Hell, where the heck is our freaking president on this, or our transportation secretary? These hacks want to ban gas stoves to save the environment, but when toxic chemicals explode, where are they? They are disingenuous and lazy at best. These people want answers, and they deserve answers. Didn't Congress just spend trillions on an infrastructure package? What an excellent use of resources, as we can see. You know, it really burns my ass, no pun intended, that we send billions and billions of dollars in resources over to Ukraine, and yet when a situation like this happens on our own soil, we barely get a peep out of our leaders, and that's a bipartisan disappointment, by the way. Prayers to the people of Ohio. You deserve better leadership than this, and at the very least, you deserve some answers and transparency. Chinese spy balloons, UFOs being shot down every other day, and now this explosion in East Palestine, Ohio. How did we get so lucky as to have this guy at the helm when it all goes down? Just blessed, I guess. Super freaking blessed. For nearly 8 years, German Shepherd Kaya stood by her handler Cole as an ambassador for veteran mental health. She inspired the PAWS Act, which requires the Department of Veteran Affairs to implement a 5-year pilot program to provide training for service dogs for veterans with PTSD. It also makes it possible for these service dogs to fly in commercial airlines alongside their handlers. Kaya was so inspirational, even Southwest Airlines paid her tribute on what would be her last flight.
We have a special guest on today's flight. Kaya is a German Shepherd service dog who's been with her handler Cole since 2014. She was specifically trained to help veterans cope with mental health issues. She was the inspiration for the PAWS Act. It's a federal law that allows the VA to find service dogs for veterans with post-traumatic stress, which was signed into law in 2021. Lobbying for the PAWS Act and traveling with Cole, Kaya has flown on Southwest over 250 times out of her 320 flights she's been on. Sadly, Kaya was recently diagnosed with an untreatable cancer, so we have the solemn honor of taking her on what will be her last flight. As she goes home to rest where she was born and first met Cole. If you have the opportunity and feel so inclined, feel free to search for her story and pay her a visit when we arrive in Dallas to show her some love. On behalf of Southwest Airlines, the 2 veterans up front, we thank both Kaya and Cole, a Marine Corps veteran, for their service.
I've seen that beautiful clip 5 times, and I choke up every single time I watch it. Here to pay his tribute to his best friend and ensure her legacy lives on is my longtime friend, Marine Corps veteran and Mission Roll Call Executive Director, Cole Lyle. Cole, it's great to be reunited with you. It's been a long time, but I gotta say, I've had you on every show of mine, from One America to The Blaze, and now here on Fox/OutKick, so it means the world to me to have you back. And I know that this is incredibly emotional for you because it's incredibly emotional for me, but I want to focus on the legacy of Kaya and what she's been able to do, not only for the veteran community, but quite frankly, she's inspired an entire country. Tell me about how her legacy is going to live on.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Tommy. And for your viewers who may not be aware, you were actually the first person to give Kaya and I an interview back on One America. There's a great photo somewhere, I still have it, of like Kaya and me on a side by side, and she's literally on camera, which was a feat in and of itself. But she was an extraordinary dog. She was an extraordinary dog before she even got trained, and then she got trained and helped me through my own issues. But on top of that, you know, somebody the other day referred to her as America's best friend, and I really couldn't think of a more fitting title for her, because she inspired so many veterans and people around the country that reached out to me and said that they would have killed themselves if they had not been inspired by Kaya to get their own service dog. You know, and then she was instrumental in the passage of the PAWS Act, which saw the VA expand access to service dogs for veterans. She really was all around just an extraordinary dog. I didn't expect this video to go viral. Frankly, after all the work she's done, I just wanted to give her as comfortable a send-off as possible when it became clear that she wasn't going to be with us that much longer. And that video, I think, has been viewed something like 42 million times across channels at this point. So it clearly resonated with people, and I'm glad it did, because I can think of no better way to honor her legacy than just to share her story.
Even if she didn't have the incredible legacy that she has, even if she was just a regular, ordinary dog, that video was still beautiful. And what you did for her, I know because you and I texted back and forth, but what you did for her in the last days of her life, bringing her back to Texas so that she could be comfortable, taking her to all her favorite spots, I mean, it makes my heart melt. It's incredibly sad, but it's also incredibly beautiful in such a way that is so unexpectedly inspirational. But I want to talk as well about the PAWS Act and what you've been able to do. And going back to the beginning of your story, when I had you on, I think it was, 2015, back at One America, talking about what inspired you to really advocate for the PAWS Act and for other veteran mental health. It was your own story and your own journey with Kaya that really got this started. Tell my audience in case they forgot.
Yeah, so, you know, I got out of the Marine Corps in 2014, and I was really in the dumps. I was transitioning, which presents its own issues and challenges. I was going through a pretty rough divorce. I didn't have a job. I wasn't in school yet. Probably drinking more than I should have been. And one night, I almost became a veteran suicide statistic. And thankfully, that was thwarted by another Marine, Semper Fidelis. But I knew I had to find a different way, and the pills that the VA had prescribed me just weren't working, and in fact were exacerbating those issues. So I had a friend who had a service dog. I reached out to him to inquire about it. Nonprofits had wait times over a year. So I decided to get Kaya, and I got her, had her trained. And really that's what inspired me. I didn't anticipate getting involved in veteran advocacy, but when I was up in Washington, Senator Tillis, who's actually about to honor her on the Senate floor here in about an hour, stopped me and asked about her and said, you know, and I was happy to be an ambassador for that issue. And I told him the VA didn't provide funding. Ultimately, that gave me the idea to write the initial version of the PAWS Act, which would provide direct grant funding to organizations that provide these dogs to veterans. Then Congressman DeSantis was the person who originally sponsored it. And it was a very bipartisan bill, despite a heated 2016 election year. We had over 250 co-sponsors that was almost split down the middle, 50-50 Republicans and Democrats, because she was such a fantastic ambassador. I like to say that, you know, I could be as persuasive as I wanted to be, but she was really the closer, because when you put such a fantastic example in front of a member of Congress, it's really hard for them to say no. Ultimately, a compromise version of the PAWS Act passed in 2021. signed into law by President Biden, actually during the Afghanistan withdrawal. So that was kind of a diamond in the rough patch as an Afghanistan veteran myself. But I want to continue honoring her legacy. I got a lot of support after I found out she wasn't going to be here. Southwest, Texas A&M, all these people, strangers, reached out to me. A lot of veterans, unfortunately, are not going to have that experience, the same experience and level of support that I do. So I'm actually in the process of setting up a fund right now in Kaya's name, and I'm happy to come back on and talk about it when it's fully formulated, but to cover the cost of veterinary care for veteran service dogs, because that's a gap that's missing right now. And I want her legacy to live on. I think that's one of the best ways to do it.
So I'm glad that you brought that up. For people that are unfamiliar with what it takes to train one of these dogs, whether they're a German Shepherd or a Malinois, or one of the other Labradors, the typical service dogs that you see in this line of work, how much does it cost to train a dog to do what Kaya did for you?
It depends. It depends on the organization, but it can range anywhere. I spent $10,000 of my own money on Kaya. That was quite frankly pretty inexpensive, just because a friend of mine was exploring the idea of becoming a service dog trainer at that time. So I was kind of his guinea pig. But I think at economies of scale, it usually is about $21,000 to $22,000 per dog, depending on what they're trained to do. And it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year in order to have these dogs trained. And it's a huge financial burden. And before the PAWS Act, and we kind of dragged the VA kicking and screaming to implement this policy, there was no option other than going through nonprofits that provide them. But the demand is so high, and nonprofit-based budgets, what they are, the wait times are long. And many of these organizations have several hundred veterans on their waiting list. So there needed to be federal funding, and this was the way that we decided to go about it.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the pharmaceutical end of all this, because we know for years the VA has gotten a bad rap for just pushing pills on veterans to solve all the problems. And for some people it works, for some people it doesn't. But if you can substitute that with a service animal, what a better way to go. For people that aren't familiar with what a service dog does, it's more than just a companion. Can you just briefly tell my audience what kind of training these dogs have and what they do for somebody like yourself that suffered from PTSD and other issues as a result of your service?
Right. So Kaya was specifically trained to wake me up from nightmares. She'd recognize when I was having one, and she would jump up in bed, lick my face to wake me up, and then just kind of sit with me while I calm down and could go back to sleep. And I didn't take pills after that because I knew that she would be there to carry me through the worst of these nightmares. She was also trained to stop anxiety attacks using what's called animal-assisted intervention. Roughly the same thing. She would recognize elevated heart rate, hyperventilation, that sort of stuff, and get up in my face and lick my face to break the snowball effect of that depression, anxiety. And it worked wonders. And not only did it work wonders, there's no real negative side effect to a service dog, like there can be with pills. And you're right, there's an important legal difference between a trained service animal and just a companion animal, or your viewers might be more familiar with the term emotional support animal. Those dogs are not legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act like a service animal is. And there's, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, technically, you can self-train your dog, but the dog obviously needs to be able to behave in public and do what are called work tasks. So the waking me up from nightmares and stopping anxiety attacks were two of the work tasks that Kaya was trained to do for me. And that's the legal difference between a service dog who's trained to perform a specific task to mitigate some of these symptoms versus an emotional support animal or a companion animal that's just there to provide general comfort.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm someone that flies often, and I have learned the difference between a trained service animal like Kaya and other military and veteran dogs and people who put a vest on their Yorkie and call it a service dog and put a vest on it so they can get out of paying the fee. Now, for me, because I know your story, because I know several other veterans with service dogs, quite frankly, that annoys me a little bit. I'm wondering if it annoys you as well, because I'm sure that just like me, as with the amount that you've traveled and your expertise in this area, I'm sure you've seen that time and time again, and it's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, so, it harms people with real service dogs, because if these animals act out, biting people, lunging at people, biting a kid, whatever the case may be, it really prejudices gate agents and flight attendants and people in public areas because they see the vest and they don't know the difference between an emotional support animal and a service dog. So actually, when I worked in the Senate, apologies to anybody who used to take their emotional support animals on planes, but I actually worked on legislation to end emotional support animals on planes because Kaya flew with me over 250 times on Southwest, over 320 times overall. And she was constantly getting lunged at and barked at and bit by other animals. And I was like, this has got to stop. So, the airlines, the flight attendants unions, pilots unions, management of the airlines, all kind of banded together behind this effort. And now, you have to sign a document, a document, and you can be punished for attesting that your dog is a trained service animal if you go on a plane and it mauls a kid or it defecates or pees on a plane or something like that. You can be legally punished now at this point for doing that because it is dangerous and it does prejudice people with an actual need for service animals to travel with them.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up and you're educating people on that. Everybody loves to travel with their animals, but, veterans that need it, they shouldn't have to suffer because some people don't want to pay that small fee. The last thing I want to ask you is for those veterans out there that are suffering from PTSD who are listening to this interview now and they want to find a way that they can get a service animal like Kaya, where would you tell them to go to start that process?
Well, there's a lot of different organizations across the country. I can name a few off the top of my head. Canines for Warriors is the one in Ponte Vedra, Florida. It's the largest organization in the country that provides service animals. Labs for Liberty in Utah, Patriot Paws in Texas, Warrior Canine Connection in the Bethesda area near Washington, D.C. A simple Google search, and you can find plenty of these organizations. You just have to make sure that they're reputable, make sure that they have good 990s, which is the financial form that nonprofits have to disclose, make sure they're in good standing. But there's a lot of organizations. And I would say if you're struggling, if you've tried the pills, if you've tried the therapy and it just doesn't work for you, it doesn't hurt to explore other options. And even if it takes a little bit of time to get a service dog, take it from me, it's worth the wait because service dogs can save lives.
Thank you so much for so many times over the years sharing your story and Kaya's story, and her legacy will absolutely live on. I will make sure of that. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you at some point when your heart is ready with another dog that can continue this mission because I know that you're going to do just that. God bless you, Cole. God bless Kaya, her memory, her legacy, and thank you once again for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tomi.
Up next, there's a real crisis brewing in Ohio, and Joe and Pete are still MIA. Maybe if a train derailed and exploded in Ukraine, they'd give a damn. My final thoughts are next.